The socialists did not see this simply as a political movement electing people to office. They saw it as a movement to change, to transform, to reform, not to revolutionize perhaps, but to reform society, to introduce all sorts of things that would make life easier. They were early advocates of activities such as workmen's compensation, unemployment insurance, Social Security in a variety of ways, medical insurance. They saw the picture very broadly that they were going to change the nature of American society by what they advocated.
Much has been published about the history of the Socialist Party in Milwaukee, but much less has been written and said about the cultural context of this movement. For example, what held the party together through world wars, the Cold War ideologies, and increasing polarization of the other political parties on the political issues? Why did this party thrive specifically in the city of Milwaukee? But before we discuss these cultural issues, let us briefly review the history and political platform of the Democratic Socialist Party in Milwaukee. The Socialist Party of America had its roots in Germany. In the middle of the 19th century, many political activists, including socialists, left Germany when the Liberal Revolution of 1848 failed. The refugees subsequently became known as the 48ers. The 48ers were active in setting up Turner societies all over the United States. The Turner societies followed their German models, were mainly gymnastic clubs that also promoted the right of free speech and clean government. Many of the 48ers and participants in the Turner societies would become active in liberal movements nationwide and even worldwide. However, quite early on, the movements splintered.
The Socialist Party of the United States originated in the United States long before the Soviet Revolution. It was a homegrown party. It was definitely a workers' party. The Socialist Workers' Party was a splinter off the Communist Party when Trotsky was voted out. And the Communist Party itself originated with the Soviet Revolution. Both of those parties have since relied upon the leadership of established parties in countries known as socialist countries. Socialist Party of the United States does not rely upon the policies of any other country. It is a democratic organization, and we do believe in the power of the electoral process. One of our chief goals is to open up the American electoral process so that it becomes more truly democratic.
The socialist movement began in Milwaukee in the 1850s. The movement increased in momentum until it reached its peak among workers in the early 20th century. During the 20th century, socialists occupied scores of political offices in Milwaukee. These included Milwaukee's first socialist mayor, Emil Seidel, who took office in 1910. Seidel focused on cleaning up corruption that existed in Milwaukee government. The same year that Seidel was elected mayor, Milwaukeean Victor Berger, editor and teacher, became the first socialist sent to the United States Congress. Berger, who had co-founded the National Party, was re-elected to the House of Representatives even after he was charged under the Espionage Act for his opposition to World War I. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but the conviction was later overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1916, socialist Daniel Hohn was elected Milwaukee mayor and held that office for 24 years. Hohn was particularly effective in getting legislation passed on stricter housing and fire codes and expanding playgrounds and school supports. But according to Melvin Hawley, the author of The American Mayor, Hohn's most important legacy was cleaning up the free and easy corruption that prevailed before he took office. Less than a decade after the Hohn era ended, Milwaukeeans elected socialist Frank Zeidler as mayor. He held the office for 12 years, beginning in 1948. During the Zeidler administration, the city of Milwaukee doubled in size and municipal equipment was refurbished, including fire apparatus, police cars, and sanitation equipment. Approximately 3,200 public housing units were constructed, streets were improved, educational TV premiered, new harbor lands were purchased, a new museum was in the works, library branches and additions were added, and docks, port facilities, bridges, and highways were built. Once again, Milwaukee gained the reputation as one of the cleanest governments in the country. Zeidler's strong socialist civil rights stance drew criticism from his opponents. He and other socialists were blatantly accused of recruiting African Americans from the South to fill city jobs in the 1950s. Zeidler made a decision in 1960 not to run for office again. Zeidler later served as national chair of the Socialist Party USA and became the party's candidate for president of the United States in 1976. Even recently, some socialist candidates have attracted significant support in the Milwaukee community. Both socialist mayoral candidate Wendell Harris and socialist county executive candidate David Schall captured 20% of the vote in Milwaukee in the year 2000. In a book published in 1982, author Elmer Beck used the term sewer socialists to capture the essence of the Milwaukee experience. This term applied to the socialist success in cleaning up Milwaukee both physically and politically. However, the term sewer socialist actually had its roots in criticism by Marxist socialists that the Milwaukee Party was more concerned with the pragmatics of efficient government, such as good sewers, than ideology. But what was and is the ideology of the Milwaukee sewer socialists? Over the years, the political platform of the Milwaukee Socialists has changed little. The party is pro-labor, pro-welfare, anti-war, and in favor of tight fiscal management, efficiently run government, and public ownership of the basic means of production and distribution. Party members are interested in evolutionary, as opposed to revolutionary, change in American society, a point never taken lightly.
Well, there's a situation today that has been fostered by capitalism, which is called unfettered capitalism. And capitalism likes the idea of no controls by our government so that they can go ahead and do all the things that's necessary to create these large incomes for CEOs and for capitalistic institutions. I think we need a fettering, or we need controls by the government so that this does not happen over and over and over again, where we now have the largest convergence between the rich and the poor that we've ever had in this country in all its history.
From the Socialist Party comes clean water, comes the environment, it comes the safety on the workplace, and also workman's compensation. All these benefits today that we take for granted have come from the Socialist Party movement.
Over the history of Milwaukee socialism, the anti-war and just peace issues have led to certain internal tensions, ranging from decisions of some to fight Franco and Spain, to decisions of others refusing to fight Nazi Germany. The issues have also led to compromises.
It was probably inevitable that Hone, as mayor of Milwaukee, and Berger, as Socialist Party leader, would cross swords over the First World War. On the one hand, Hone felt that he had to uphold the law. He was a sworn officer of the law as mayor of Milwaukee. He had to do certain functions, including participation in the draft and the reporting of the draft totals in the First World War. More than that, however, Berger, who was having trouble with the federal government, felt that Hone had to be as silent as he could be in terms of the war principles that the Socialist Party upheld. So they crossed on one basic principle that affected Hone, and on the other hand, they had a philosophical difference. Berger said the war is bad. Hone said, if the United States government prosecutes a war, it will become a very active government, and that is, in a sense, what the socialists are aiming at, a very active government involved in the production of material goods. And therefore, the differences between Hone and Berger were quite highly principled. They were not mean or personal.
These issues of pragmatism and seeking common grounds play roles in cultural practices of the Milwaukee Socialists, as we will see shortly. To understand the Milwaukee Socialist experience, one needs to understand both its roots in German culture and the importance the party placed on evolutionary change. Like many political movements then and today, the Milwaukee Socialists were organized along ethnic lines.
The history of the Socialist Party, particularly in the last 100 years, there have been strong elements of ethnic loyalty as compared to party loyalty. For instance, in the Great World War, of 1914 and 1918, when the Socialist Party took a position against that war, it lost a lot of members who were of British Isle ancestry. The members from Germany tended to stay in. A few persons of American extraction stayed in, but many persons who had family ties that went back to Great Britain and the various states, except Ireland, left the party. In the 1919 and 1920, many foreign language sections of the Socialist Party became enamored of Lenin's communism, and they left the party en masse. These were particularly Slavic elements in the party. Over a period of time, there was some division between the New York Jewish leadership and the Middle Western leadership, which was of Native American stock or German stock. And that took place primarily in the 1930s in a division between Mayor Daniel Hone of Milwaukee and Morris Hillquit, the leader of the Socialist Party.
Some ethnic groups had particular interest in the Socialists because of their support for labor.
The railroad Irish recognized the people that were pertinent in a labor movement, not all of them Irish Catholics, and were socialists, prominent socialists, and recognized that what was good for them through the labor movement, was being proposed by the Socialist Party, which is voting your pocketbook, right?
The cause of the socialists, which was the improvement of the conditions of workers, good government, reduced costs and prices for things like utilities, transportation, electricity, gas, these kinds of concerns were shared by all kinds of people. And of course, there were many Poles who, in fact, were attracted to the ideas of the socialist movement, and many of them ended up winning political office.
But most of the early leaders in the Milwaukee Socialist movement were Germans through and through.
When we look at the Democratic Socialist Party that pretty much was founded by Germans in Wisconsin and around Milwaukee, we're looking at people who put together a form of government that was put to serve the interests of people. And to this very day, we still benefit from that form of government that was started here in Germany, and we benefited from it here in this city.
Both the philosophy and practices of the Milwaukee Socialists had German roots. A form of militant socialism came from German philosopher Karl Marx, who argued that class struggle and conflict were inevitable outcomes of human history. Less conflict-oriented in his approach was another German, Ferdinand Lassalle, who founded the General German Workers' Association, which later gave way to the Social Democratic Party of Germany. LaSalle believed that the conditions of the working class could be improved through organized effort and legislation. The Milwaukee movement was influenced somewhat by Marx in that many members saw a dichotomy between the interests of workers and capitalists, but were more influenced by LaSalle because they believed strongly in the democratic process and gradual reform. They wanted class conflict resolved at the ballot box. Today, the Socialist Party in Milwaukee is called the Democratic Socialist Party. Many of the 48ers that left Germany also had specific ideas about freedom and theology.
The Germans brought to the United States influences that were incorporated into those who were best and strongest in the socialist convictions. Among these were the Turners. A second group were the Freidenker groups, the Freethinker, the Free Society, basically the Unitarian, as we would call them, unchurched Germans.
The encyclical of Leo XIII of 1890, called Rerum Novarum, was a severe attack on German socialism, and that was brought over to the United States. So relatively few people of the Socialist Party were ever members, were Roman Catholics, although there were Roman Catholics who were active members in the party. And that difficulty existed up until maybe 1960 or shortly thereafter.
The formal party practices were modeled after the German socialist movement, which included the organization of subunits to the existence of a daily socialist newspaper, to party policy and conformity to the socialist platform.
Berger almost duplicated in the United States the kind of tightly disciplined political party that he had known as practiced in Germany to begin with and in all of the countries of Europe.
While the party structure followed strict formal guidelines, leisure time activities were, well, anything but formal. The Socialist Party in Milwaukee was grounded in a fully lived life. According to German scholar Don Heinrich Tolsman and the German-American Experience, social relations among Germans were an extension of family life. German families worked together, but also enjoyed their social life together. Germans brought with them a large capacity for the enjoyment of life. Among the leisure time activities Germans contributed in mass to U.S. culture were music, theater, art, architecture, gymnastics, and a penchant for Sunday frolicking.
You were involved. You were involved not just as a kid in a group, but families were involved. And it was a family structure. Many of the functions that we would go to not just involved the kids, but the families were there also. See. The Socialist Bazaar at the auditorium. It wasn't a big thing to see beer flow down there. It was a big thing to see it flow within family structures.
During the height of socialist influence locally, most of the voting population in Milwaukee also shared German roots. While the socialists came to power on the heels of, and perhaps in response to, government corruption in Milwaukee, the voting population may have also recognized some cultural affinities with their socialist neighbors. For example, the socialists were the only political party locally to oppose prohibition early in the 20th century, an issue that clearly united Germans all over America.
One of the issues that was foremost in the minds of people in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee during the Milwaukee socialist heyday was the issue of prohibition. On this, one might say reformers would be prohibitionists, but not in the case of the socialists. They supported the breweries. In fact, they got money from the breweries to help their support of the breweries against prohibition.
In addition to the family activities, Milwaukee had an active organization for youth called the Young People's Socialist League, or YPSL, YPSLs. This organization had been founded nationally at the turn of the 20th century. While the YPSLs all over the country were active in political education, campaigning for socialist candidates, labor movements, protest, and demonstrations. In Milwaukee, the YPSL also took on a decidedly social spirit with decidedly German leisure time activities. Young people could join the YPSL whether or not their parents were socialists. At an early age, the YPSL youth attended Sunday schools, an alternative to Christian Sunday schools that were developed by the free thinkers of the movement. The younger YPSL members usually spent more of their time in recreational activities than socialist educational activities. Most of these activities were those the Germans had brought with them to America en masse, including theater, arts and crafts, singing societies such as the Young People's Socialist Choir, and physical activities through gymnastics and nature walks. This does not mean that all socialist messages were ignored. In addition to the German influences, Milwaukee socialists truly lived their lives in the spirit of evolutionary change. The spirit of evolutionary rather than revolutionary change implied a solid commitment to democratic processes and cooperation. Milwaukee's sewer socialists were committed to democracy in their formal meetings and committed to egalitarianism in their everyday lives.
The association with the people down below, or the common people, the worker, was more of a natural thing and more of an honest thing, it seemed to me always, than it was just some of the other political parties and their candidates and office holders seeking votes and so on and so forth. In other words, what I'm saying, a man like Frank Zeidler, when he was the mayor of the city of Milwaukee, he never drove a car, so consequently he took public transportation to work.
I think that the socialists, had they ever come to power thoroughly, would have been afraid to be revolutionaries, even though they proclaimed revolution. They were basically reformers. They were in many respects the advanced guard of the progressive movement. They wanted to change society, but they wanted to change society within the confines of the United States Constitution, the state constitution, and the other limits that they undoubtedly had to get along with as long as they were in the United States.
In Frank Zeidler's book, published in 2005, he describes his attraction to socialism and states that the socialist ideals of cooperation and brotherhood might help to prevent future wars. Cooperative relations may have been a key to the socialist durability in Milwaukee. During Mayor Daniel Hohn's long administration, he never had a socialist majority in the Common Council, yet he was able to get nearly all of the strategic legislation through that lawmaking body. Socialists were active in forming cooperative ventures from housing co-ops to food store co-ops. The local socialists worked with any political movement that supported their general platform. They even voluntarily retired from the ballot in 1935 when it appeared that their allies would stand a better chance of gaining political offices.
In the 1930s to the 1940s, there was a very complex arrangement between the Socialist Party and the progressives who were originally progressive Republicans. The labor movement, which had strong roots in the Socialist Party, had leadership that demanded the Socialist Party get off the ballot in 1935 and vote in the progressive column because they were losing representatives in the state legislature when votes were split between the Socialists and the Progressives. So the Socialist Party got off the ballot in 1935, and its members joined the Farmer Labor Progressive Federation. This federation had some successes in the 1938 election, but by 1940 it was wiped out. By that time, many of the socialist leaders had migrated from the Socialist Party into the Progressive Party, and from the Progressive Party they migrated into the Democratic Party.
Confrontational politics and confrontational personal styles were rarely seen among local socialists. Even when Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy engaged in an aggressive campaign of accusations against people he believed, with little evidence, to be communists or communist sympathizers, most local socialists were silent. While the socialists here had expressed their own concern about the Communist Party, few, if any, confronted McCarthy over possible civil rights abuses.
The socialists had been in the 30s and 40s almost at war with the Communist Party, who in the United States was heavily funded by the Soviet Union. And one of the Communist Party's goals at that time was to monopolize the left. In doing so, it was to undermine the efforts of the socialists. They infiltrated the party to disrupt the party. They wreaked havoc on the left. They wreaked havoc in the labor movement in many respects. And it was more of a destructive type of effort rather than a constructive. And in the 50s, when after World War II, and the nation all of a sudden went into a Cold War against communism, we saw McCarthyism, we saw the loss of civil liberties, we saw, the Rosenberg trial and the Rosenberg executions. And a lot of these were at least had the appearance of trumped-up charges. They were certainly the result more of paranoia than they were any real threat to the nation. And the Socialist Party, I feel, should have spoke up against them. But on the other hand, when you looked at Joe McCarthy, as I said, he was more of an opportunist. He had fairly good relations. Frank Zeidler was mayor of Milwaukee, while Joe McCarthy was senator of Wisconsin. Joe McCarthy often told Frank, hey, tell me what you need and I'll fight for it in Washington, which shows he wasn't a terribly strong ideologue.
Effect of Joseph McCarthy on the Socialist Party was minimal. McCarthy very seldom attacked anybody in the state. And socialists, including myself, couldn't see how anybody ever took him seriously. And to this day, I don't see how that is. For a time, Joseph McCarthy acted as a liberal. For instance, he was interested in housing for veterans and low-income people, and he worked a little bit on that issue with the city of Milwaukee. It wasn't until he started to run for re-election in the 1950s that he picked up the issue of communism, about which he knew very little. But there he attacked people out of the state of Wisconsin. And the socialists and others couldn't comprehend how he was having any kind of influence in the scene nationally.
The socialists would have poker games. McCarthy often sat in with the socialists up in the Shawano, Appleton area in these poker games. So, I think this undercut some of the animosity that should have been shown. McCarthy was just doing this for opportunistic reasons. It was unhealthy. It was the wrong thing to do, and socialists should have taken more of a stance, I think.
Today, the remaining handful of socialist families in the Milwaukee Socialist Party still take advantage of any opportunities given to speak out on issues of social justice locally. They continue to support pro-labor, pro-welfare, and anti-war platforms and express concerns about growing government corruption in Milwaukee. Recently, 4 Milwaukee alderpeople and 1 Milwaukee state senator have been federally indicted on corruption charges. A number of other scandals have rocked government offices and departments. Most of these socialist families active in the party still have German surnames, although few claim to practice much of their German culture anymore. They still get together for some social activities such as picnics, and many members are also turners. As in the past, the remaining socialists still rely on cooperative relations with like-minded groups to advance liberal causes.
We are presently working on efforts to get a Green Party and other groups like us to work together, the Reform Party and along with the Socialist Party, to work on bringing the election of our country back to the center, or even maybe a little left of center.
Yeah, I ran for county executive not terribly successfully, but one of the ideals is if we can get people on the ballot, and I think my particular candidacy is a good example of that, is we get to get ideas out there, and a lot of times candidates don't have much of an agenda, so they find they're borrowing a lot of good ideas, and I was speaking about strengthening parks. I was speaking about stopping the privatization of government and county government, and the different candidates were all starting to say the same things.
An old nemesis, the Catholic Church, is sometimes today more of an ally than a foe.
Well, the organization is Network. It's a group, it's a social Catholic justice group that works in Washington, D.C. They poll its members for issues, social justice issues, and pick 10 to work on for the year. Then they poll all the Democrats and Republicans and all the senators and representatives as to whether they voted positive or negative or didn't vote. And they put this entire matrix into their newsletter every year. And I checked a number of times when Bernie Sanders was an independent, but he's really a socialist, from Vermont, in the House of Representatives, his vote was positive all the way across for all 10 issues. He was the only congressman who got that perfect a record.
I didn't think there was anything wrong with being a liberal and being a Christian at the same time. In fact, I think it's a pretty good lineup now.
But what of the party's future here?
In the state of Wisconsin right now and in the city of Milwaukee, we have a serious problem with government corruption. We've got every institution of our government right now, it seems to be corrupt on some level.
Some wonder if during this time of exposed corruption in Milwaukee government, voters won't begin to recall that it was the so-called sewer socialists that came in and cleaned up the refuse.